Elaine and Thomas, eager to start fresh in their new town, believe their move will bring peace and new opportunities. But Elaine soon finds herself facing a brutal reality. Under the watch of officers Mitch and Tanner, men whose cruelty is as notorious as their unchecked power, a simple grocery trip spirals into a nightmare. Each hour that passes under the blistering sun pushes Elaine's endurance to the limit. Yet, unknown to these officers, Thomas is a man whose response to injustice will send shockwaves through the community. But before that, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal hidden truths and inspire hope. Maple Grove wasn't the kind of town that made headlines. From the outside, it looked like any other suburban dream. Pristine streets lined with mature oak trees, well-maintained colonial homes with wraparound porches, and carefully manicured public parks. But beneath this picture-perfect exterior lay a different reality, one that revealed itself in subtle ways. The way Black residents hurried through their errands, the nervous glances cast toward police cruisers, the unnatural quiet that fell over certain neighborhoods when patrol cars rolled through. Another complaint about officers Mitchell and Tanner. Sarah Jenkins, the town clerk, muttered as she filed yet another report in a drawer already stuffed with similar documents. Not that anything will come of it. She glanced at the framed photos on her desk, snapshots of town events where the segregation was obvious, even if unspoken. The Black families always clustered together at one end of the summer festival, the white families at the other. It hadn't always been this way, but the last decade had seen a steady erosion of trust, particularly since Mitch and Tanner had joined the force. Into this carefully maintained powder keg came Elaine and Thomas Wilson, their U-Haul truck pulling up to the cream-colored Victorian on Cedar Street on a warm Saturday morning. Elaine stepped out first, her dark curls caught in the morning breeze, her smile bright enough to light up the whole street. "Thomas, look at those bay windows," she called out to her husband, who was carefully maneuvering the truck into their new driveway. "Can't you just see me grading papers there while you're working on your computer?" Thomas killed the engine and jumped down from the driver's seat, his athletic frame moving with the measured grace of someone used to carrying authority. At 35, he carried himself with quiet confidence, though he was careful to keep his law enforcement background under wraps for now. The town council had asked him to keep his upcoming position as police chief confidential until the official announcement next month. "I can see a lot of things in this house, baby," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "All of them good." They stood there for a moment, taking in their new home. The realtor had mentioned it was built in 1890, and Elaine had already researched its history. It had been part of the Underground Railroad, a fact that felt significant to her. "From sanctuary to sanctuary," she'd said when they'd first viewed it. "Need any help with that?" A voice called out. Their new neighbor, an elderly white woman named Martha, was making her way across her lawn, carrying a covered dish. "I brought my famous chicken casserole. Welcome wagon tradition, and all that." "That's so kind of you," Elaine said, moving to meet her. "I'm Elaine Wilson, and this is my husband Thomas. He works in public service." "Oh, what kind?" Martha asked, curious about the new arrivals. "Administrative work, mostly," Thomas replied smoothly, the practiced response coming easily. "Looking for a fresh start in a smaller town." Martha nodded, then glanced around before lowering her voice. "Well, I should warn you both. This town has its challenges, particularly with certain members of law enforcement." Thomas's ears perked up, but he maintained a neutral expression. "Oh." Martha's warning came wrapped in careful phrases and meaningful pauses. "Officers Mitchell and Tanner, they have their own way of doing things. The whole force does really. We're supposed to be getting a new police chief soon, but who knows if that'll change anything. Change can be hard," Thomas said diplomatically, while cataloging every word. "No, you don't understand," Martha insisted, her voice dropping further. "Last month, Mrs. Robinson's boy, he's 14, was just sitting in the park reading. They made him empty his backpack, dump his books in the dirt. Said he looked suspicious. When his mother complained," Martha shook her head. Suddenly, They were getting pulled over every other day. Elaine, arranging dishes in a cabinet. Turn around. That's terrible. Surely something can be done. Best to keep your heads down, Martha advised. At least until things change, if they ever do. After Martha left, Elaine continued unpacking with determined energy. It's not right, Thomas. Someone needs to stand up to them. Thomas watched his wife, thinking about the changes he would implement once he took command. But for now, he had to stay quiet, observe, and document. Everything in its time, baby, he said softly. The next few days were filled with the ordinary chaos of moving, arranging furniture, finding the best local pizza place, meeting more neighbors. Most were welcoming, though some welcome wagons felt more genuine than others. Then came Tuesday morning, and their first real glimpse of what Martha had been warning them about. Thomas was in their home office, reviewing some paperwork, when he heard the commotion outside. From the bay window, he had a clear view of the park across the street. Two officers, one tall and lean, the other stocky with a military-style crew cut, were standing over a black teenager who couldn't have been more than 15. "What's so interesting in that backpack, boy?" the taller one was saying. "Must be something real good for you to be sitting here, all suspicious-like." "I'm just doing my homework," the boy said, his voice steady but his hands trembling as he held out his algebra textbook. "My mom's working, and our AC's broken." Save the sob story, the stockier officer cut in, knocking the book from the boy's hands. "Stand up, hands where we can see them." Thomas watched, his jaw clenched, as they made the boy empty his backpack onto the ground. Textbooks, notebooks, a brown paper lunch bag, all scattered in the dirt. They patted him down roughly, making a show of it for the gathering onlookers. Every muscle in his body urged him to intervene, but he couldn't, not yet. Instead, he took out his phone and recorded the incident, adding it to his growing file of evidence. "Nothing this time," the tall officer finally said, his disappointment evident. "But we got our eyes on you. Next time." "There won't be a next time," the boy said quietly, already gathering his belongings. "I'll study at home." "Smart kid," the stockier one laughed. Finally learning his place. Later that same day, Elaine was returning from enrolling in her new teaching position at Maple Grove Elementary when she witnessed another incident. A black woman, probably in her 50s, was walking home with grocery bags when the same patrol car pulled up alongside her. "Need some help with those bags, ma'am?" the taller officer called out, his tone mockingly polite. "No, thank you, officer," the woman replied, quickening her pace. "Now that's not very neighborly," his partner said, stepping out of the car. He deliberately bumped into her as he passed, causing her to lose her grip on one of the bags. Oranges and cans rolled across the sidewalk as the officers laughed. "Oops," the tall one said. "Better be more careful next time." They drove off, leaving the woman to gather her scattered groceries. Elaine rushed to help her, but the woman waved her away. "Don't," she whispered. "They might see. Just go home." The message was clear. Help could make things worse. Over the next few days, Thomas and Elaine began to understand the town's dynamics better. At the local diner, black customers were served last, if at all. In the park, certain benches were implicitly off-limits. And always, there was the presence of that particular patrol car, making its rounds like feudal lords surveying their domain. But while Thomas quietly documented every incident he witnessed, Elaine refused to let the darkness dim her light. In her classroom at Maple Grove Elementary, she created a warm, welcoming space. Her students, a mix of black and white children, responded to her enthusiasm with their own. Mrs. Wilson, a little white girl named Sarah, asked during their first week, "Why did Mrs. Thompson tell us not to sit with Marcus at lunch?" Elaine looked at the black boy who had shrunk in his seat. "In this classroom," she said firmly, "we sit with whoever makes us smile. And Marcus has one of the best smiles I've ever seen." She winked at Marcus, who sat up a little straighter. After school, she chatted with parents, organized study groups, and began planning a community reading program. "Things can change," she told Thomas over dinner. "They already are. Today I saw Sarah and Marcus playing together at recess. Their parents were talking after school. Small steps, but they matter. Thomas wished he could tell her about his plans, about how in just a few weeks he'd be in a position to make real changes. But the town council had been clear: absolute secrecy until the official announcement. They wanted to prevent any interference with his observation of the current force's operations. Small steps, he agreed, reaching for her hand. Outside, officers Mitchell and Tanner cruised past their house, barely giving the new black residents a second glance. They had no idea that behind those bay windows sat their future boss, watching and waiting. No idea that every cruel joke, every abuse of power, every act of intimidation was being carefully documented. The sun set over Maple Grove, casting long shadows across perfectly manicured lawns. In their new home, Thomas and Elaine prepared for bed, each carrying their own secrets. He, his true identity. She, her growing fear that her optimism might not be enough to change this town's deep-rooted prejudices. But change was coming to Maple Grove, whether officers Mitchell and Tanner were ready for it or not. The late August heat settled over Maple Grove like a heavy blanket, the kind of suffocating warmth that made even the shortest errands feel like marathons. Elaine Wilson stood in her kitchen, fanning herself with a magazine as she made her shopping list. The clock on the wall read 1:30 p.m., not the ideal time to venture out into the heat. But with Thomas away on a 2-day work trip, she needed to restock the pantry before he returned tomorrow. She glanced at her phone, smiling at Thomas's morning text. "Miss you, baby. One more day of meetings, then I'm all yours. Stay safe." He'd been particularly protective lately, especially after witnessing more of Mitchell and Tanner's behavior around town. Part of her wished he was here, but she pushed the thought aside. She couldn't let fear rule her life. "It's just groceries," she told herself, tucking her curls into a neat bun. Quick trip to Thompson's Market, then home to grade papers. The heat hit her like a wall as she stepped outside. Her blue sundress, chosen for its lightweight fabric, already felt like too much in the sweltering afternoon sun. The drive to Thompson's Market was short, just 10 minutes through town, past the neat rows of houses with their perfectly trimmed lawns and American flags. As she pulled into the parking lot, she noticed the familiar patrol car parked in the shade of a large oak tree. Officers Mitchell and Tanner were inside, apparently taking a break from their rounds. Elaine felt a flutter of unease but pushed it aside. They were public servants, after all. What could they do to her in broad daylight, in front of dozens of witnesses? She grabbed her purse and reusable shopping bags, deliberately walking with her head high. As she approached the store entrance, she heard car doors slam behind her. Well, Officer Mitchell's voice carried across the parking lot. "What do we have here?" Elaine kept walking, pretending not to hear. Her hand tightened around her purse strap. "Hey." Tanner's voice was sharper. "He's talking to you, lady. Stay calm," she thought. Thomas had taught her how to handle law enforcement encounters. She stopped and turned slowly, keeping her hands visible. "Yes, officers." Her voice was steady, professional. "Is there a problem?" The two men approached with the lazy confidence of predators who knew their prey couldn't escape. Mitchell, tall and lean with cold blue eyes, moved to her left while Tanner, stockier and red-faced from the heat, flanked her right. "Got a report about a suspicious person matching your description," Mitchell said, his tone mockingly formal, apparently causing a disturbance in the parking lot. Elaine looked around the nearly empty parking lot, then back at Mitchell. "I just arrived, officer. I haven't spoken to anyone. You calling me a liar?" Mitchell's hand moved to rest on his belt, close to his weapon. "Because that's how it sounds." "No, sir. I'm simply stating a fact. I just pulled in to do some shopping." She gestured toward her reusable bags. "You can check the security cameras if you'd like." Tanner snorted. "Getting smart with us now, huh? You people never learn." "I'm not getting smart. I'm just trying to understand." Mitchell's hand shot out, grabbing her upper arm hard enough to bruise. "Let's talk about your attitude problem. Please let go of my arm." Elaine's heart was pounding, but her voice remained calm. You're hurting me. Oh, we're hurting you? Tanner laughed. Sounds like resisting to me, Mitch. What do you think? Definitely resisting, Mitchell agreed, his grip tightening. And after we received all those complaints about her harassing customers. What complaints? I haven't. Elaine's protest was cut short as Mitchell yanked her forward, causing her to stumble. Her shopping bags fell to the ground. You have the right to remain silent, Mitchell began, but his smirk made it clear this wasn't a real arrest. This was something else entirely. They half-dragged, half-pushed her across the parking lot, past her car, toward the small town square adjacent to the market. A decorative metal pole, part of an old-fashioned lamppost, stood in the center of the brick-paved plaza. Please, Elaine said, trying to keep her voice steady. Whatever you think I've done, we can discuss this properly. Shut up, Tanner snapped, producing a zip tie from his pocket. Time for a lesson in respect. People were beginning to gather at the edges of the square. Elaine saw Mrs. Thompson, the store owner's wife, watching from the market entrance. A few of her students' parents were there too, their faces masks of helpless concern. Anyone interferes, Mitchell announced to the growing crowd, they'll be arrested for obstruction of justice. This woman was caught attempting to incite a riot. That's a lie. Elaine's composure finally broke. I was just going shopping. Someone help me, please. The zip tie bit into her wrists as Tanner bound them behind the pole. The metal was already hot from the afternoon sun, burning against her bare arms where her dress left them exposed. Please, she tried one more time, looking directly at Mitchell. You know this isn't right. He leaned in close, his breath hot on her face. What isn't right is you people thinking you can just move in here, act like you own the place. Consider this a welcome ceremony. My husband will be looking for me, she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Tanner laughed. The computer guy? Let him come. Maybe we'll have a pole waiting for him too. The crowd grew larger, but maintained its distance. Phones appeared, recording discreetly from behind trees and benches. Elaine saw Jenny Parker, mother of one of her students, start to step forward, only to be pulled back by her husband. I'm sorry, Jenny mouthed, tears in her eyes. The sun climbed higher in the cloudless sky. Sweat trickled down Elaine's back, soaking her dress. Her legs began to shake from standing in one position, but the zip ties gave her no room to shift her weight. How long are you going to leave her there? Someone in the crowd finally called out. As long as it takes for the lesson to sink in, Tanner replied, under the shade of a tree, energy drink in one hand. Anyone got a problem with that? No one did. Or at least, no one dared to say so. The heat became a living thing, pressing against Elaine from all sides. Her mouth was desert dry, her lips cracking. How long had it been? An hour? 2. The sun seemed frozen at its zenith, beating down mercilessly. She tried to focus on her breathing, on staying conscious. Thomas would still be in meetings, unaware of what was happening back home. She prayed no one would call him yet. He'd drop everything, rush back, maybe do something rash. But as the minutes crawled by like hours, she began to wish someone would call him anyway. Mrs. Wilson? A small voice penetrated her heat-induced haze. One of her students, Marcus, from her class, was standing at the edge of the square, held back by his terrified mother. Get that kid out of here, Mitchell barked. But she's my teacher, Marcus protested. She's nice. She doesn't. Marcus, baby, please, his mother whispered, pulling him away. We can't help right now. The world began to tilt sideways. Elaine's knees buckled, but the zip ties held her upright, cutting deeper into her wrists. She could feel blood trickling down her hands, joining the sweat that soaked her dress. Through her blurring vision, she saw more phones recording, more faces in the crowd, some angry, some ashamed, all helpless. Or choosing to be helpless. Was this how change happened? One person at a time, learning to look away? Not like this, she mumbled, her tongue thick in her dry mouth. We're better than this. Still talking, Mitchell approached, twirling his baton. Maybe we haven't made our point clear enough, But even he stopped short when Elaine's eyes rolled back in her head. Her body went limp, held up only by the bonds that tied her to the pole. "Mitch," Tanner said, a note of uncertainty finally creeping into his voice. "Maybe we should." "She's faking," Mitchell snapped, but he didn't sound convinced. "Has to be." A murmur ran through the crowd. Phones were lowered, then raised again. Someone was crying, probably Jenny Parker. Someone else was making a call, speaking urgently into their phone. The videos were already spreading across social media. Local Facebook groups lit up with footage of the incident. Twitter threads grew longer by the minute, each share accompanied by increasingly angry comments. A hashtag started trending. #Justice for Elaine. The Sun continued its relentless assault, unaware and uncaring of the drama unfolding beneath its scorching rays. In its harsh light, the true face of Maple Grove was exposed. Every shadow of prejudice, every dark corner of complicity illuminated for all to see. Officers Mitchell and Tanner stood guard over their handiwork, unaware that their actions today would soon lead to their downfall. They had no idea that the woman they tied to a pole was the wife of their future boss. No idea that every second of their cruelty was being documented, spreading across the internet, racing toward the one person who could finally bring them to justice. The question wasn't whether change would come to Maple Grove anymore. The question was, how many would suffer before it did? The afternoon sun was beginning to soften when Thomas Wilson's car pulled into the driveway of his new home in Maple Grove. After days of intensive meetings preparing for his role as the town's new police chief, he was looking forward to surprising Elaine by coming home a day early. He'd picked up her favorite chocolate croissants from that bakery she loved in the city, and the thought of her delighted smile made the exhausting trip worth it. But something fell off the moment he stepped out of his car. The house was dark, though it was only 4:30 p.m. No music drifted from the windows. Elaine always had something playing while she graded papers. No delicious smells wafted from the kitchen, where she usually prepared an early dinner. "Elaine," he called out as he unlocked the front door. His voice echoed through empty rooms. "Baby, you home?" The house felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but that wasn't unusual. She often ran errands in the afternoon. Still, an uneasy feeling settled in his stomach as he moved through the house. In the kitchen, he found her shopping list still on the counter, partially finished. A coffee mug sat in the sink, lipstick staining its rim. Her morning coffee, long cold now. Everything looked exactly as it might on any normal day, except for the silence. The heavy, oppressive silence. Thomas pulled out his phone and dialed Elaine's number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. "Hey baby, it's me. Just got home early and missing my welcome home kiss. Give me a call when you get this." He tried to keep his tone light, casual. No need to panic. She was probably just running errands. Shopping. Maybe her phone died. It happens sometimes. 5 minutes later, he called again. Straight to voicemail. 10 minutes after that, another call. Voicemail. The unease in his stomach grew into a cold knot of worry. Elaine always answered his calls, or at least texted back quickly. It was one of their rules. Always reachable, always in contact. They'd learned the hard way how important that was, especially in towns like Maple Grove. Thomas paced the kitchen, his cop instincts warring with his desire not to overreact. He picked up her shopping list, studying her neat handwriting. Milk, bread, pot roast ingredients. She'd been planning to cook his favorite meal. Another call. Voicemail. Okay, think, he muttered to himself. Think like a cop, not a worried husband. He pulled up his contacts and called Jenny Parker, one of the few neighbors Elaine had connected with, whose kid was in her class. Hello. Jenny's voice sounded strange, strained, almost fearful. Mrs. Parker? This is Thomas Wilson, Elaine's husband. Have you seen her today? A long pause. Too long. Mr. Wilson? I'm so sorry. The cold knot in his stomach turned to ice. Sorry for what? What's happening? I can't. I don't. Jenny's voice broke. Check your social media. Oh God, I'm so sorry. We wanted to help, but they wouldn't let anyone. They said they'd arrest anyone who... Thomas was already pulling up Facebook on his phone, hands shaking slightly as he navigated to the local community group. The first post hit him like a physical blow. Happening now. Police officers abuse power. Woman tied to pole in town square. The thumbnail showed a familiar blue sundress. Jesus, no, Thomas whispered, clicking the video. For a moment, the screen was blurry, filmed from behind a tree. Then it focused, and his world stopped turning. Elaine, was tied to a lamppost in the town square. Her head hung forward, dark curls escaping from her usually neat bun. Even through the shaky footage, he could see the sweat soaking her dress, the angry red marks on her arms where the metal pole had burned her skin in the afternoon sun. The video's audio was distant, but clear enough. Anyone interferes, they'll be arrested for obstruction of justice. This woman was caught attempting to incite a riot. Thomas recognized the voice. Officer Mitchell. The same officer he'd watched harass that teenage boy in the park. The same officer who would soon learn exactly who he'd messed with. Another video, posted 30 minutes ago. Elaine slumping against her restraints, clearly unconscious. Officer Tanner laughing, telling the crowd she was faking it. The rage that rose in Thomas wasn't the hot, blinding kind. It was cold, methodical, the kind of fury that came with absolute clarity of purpose. His hands stopped shaking. His breathing steadied. He went to their bedroom and opened his closet, reaching for the lockbox in the back. Inside lay his badge and gun. Not the local department issue he'd receive next week, but his own from his previous position. He hadn't planned to reveal his law enforcement background until the official announcement, but plans changed. The drive to the town square took exactly 7 minutes. Thomas counted every second, his mind racing through scenarios, procedures, consequences. Part of him wanted to call the state police, the FBI, anyone who could bring the full force of the law down on Mitchell and Tanner. But that would take time Elaine didn't have. He could see the crowd before he reached the square. At least 100 people now, their phones raised like silent witnesses to the town's shame. The setting sun painted everything in shades of orange and red, casting long shadows across the brick-paved plaza. Thomas parked haphazardly, leaving his car half on the curb. As he stepped out, he heard the murmurs ripple through the crowd. They parted before him like water, perhaps sensing the contained violence in his measured stride. Elaine was still there, still tied to the pole. Her head had lolled to one side, her skin ashen despite the heat. Mitchell and Tanner stood nearby, their earlier bravado somewhat diminished by the growing crowd and their victim's unconscious state. "What do we do, Mitch?" Tanner was saying, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet square. "She's not looking too good." "Shut up," Mitchell hissed. "We can't back down now. We'd lose all credibility. Step away from my wife." Thomas's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. Both officers turned, hands instinctively moving to their weapons, then freezing as they registered the badge clipped to his belt. "Who the hell are you?" Mitchell demanded, but there was a tremor in his voice. Thomas continued forward, each step measured, deliberate. "My name is Thomas Wilson. Next week, I'm supposed to be announced as your new chief of police. But right now," he was close enough now to see the fear dawning in their eyes. "Right now, I'm just a husband looking at two officers who made a very, very big mistake." The crowd had gone completely silent. Dozens of phones recorded as Thomas stopped directly in front of Mitchell and Tanner, close enough to smell their nervous sweat. "Sir, we didn't know," Tanner began. "Shut up." Thomas's voice was arctic. "You didn't know she was my wife. Would it have mattered if you did? Is that how you determine who deserves basic human dignity in this town? By who they're married to?" Mitchell's hand twitched toward his weapon again. Thomas's eyes flicked to the movement. "Try it," he said softly. "Give me a reason." "We were responding to a complaint," Mitchell started, but Thomas cut him off. "No, you weren't. You saw a black woman shopping at the wrong time of day, and you decided to have some fun. You thought you were untouchable. You thought there would be no consequences. Thomas's voice remained eerily calm. You were wrong. He turned to the crowd. Mrs. Parker, would you please call an ambulance? Jenny Parker stepped forward, phone already in hand, nodding tearfully. Mr. Thompson? Thomas continued, picking out the store owner in the crowd. I trust your security cameras caught everything. Yes, sir, Thompson replied firmly. Every second. Thomas nodded, then turned back to the officers. Give me the key to those zip ties. Now. We don't have, Tanner began. Either you have a key, or you plan to leave my wife tied to this pole indefinitely. Which is it? Mitchell reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and produced a small key. Both of you step back. Farther. Keep going until I tell you to stop. They retreated, looking less like officers of the law with each backward step and more like what they truly were, bullies suddenly confronted with real authority. Thomas moved to Elaine, his hands gentle as he supported her weight while unlocking the zip ties. She stirred slightly at his touch, mumbling something incoherent. I'm here, baby, he whispered. I've got you. You're safe now. As the zip ties fell away, he gathered her into his arms, cradling her like something precious. In the distance, sirens wailed, the ambulance responding to Jenny's call. Officer Mitchell, Officer Tanner, Thomas's voice carried across the square. Remove your badges and weapons. Place them on the ground. Then kneel with your hands behind your heads. You can't, Mitchell protested. I can and I am. This is no longer an arrest. This is me preventing you from fleeing before state investigators arrive to document your crimes. And make no mistake, everything you've done today is a crime. The badge doesn't make it legal. The badge doesn't make it right. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the two officers, who had terrorized their town for so long, slowly complied. In the dying light of day, their shadows stretched long and thin across the bricks, like the last remnants of a darkness finally being banished. Thomas held Elaine closer as she began to stir more forcefully. The ambulance was pulling into the square now, its lights painting the scene in alternating red and white. Thomas? Elaine's voice was barely a whisper. You're home early. Couldn't stay away, he murmured into her hair. Rest now. Everything's going to be different from here on out. She managed a weak smile. You blew your cover. Some things are more important than plans. As paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher, Thomas looked over his wife's head at Mitchell and Tanner, still kneeling on the ground. They looked small now, stripped of their power, their true nature exposed for all to see. The sun sank lower, its last rays catching the badge on Thomas's belt, not just a symbol of authority now, but a promise of change. In the growing darkness, phones continued to record, documenting not just the end of this incident, but the beginning of something new in Maple Grove. The time for hiding was over. The time for justice had begun. The paramedics swarmed around them as Thomas cradled Elaine in his arms. Her skin burned against his touch, hot enough to make him wince. Angry red blisters had formed where the metal pole had pressed against her arms, and her wrists were raw and bleeding from the zip ties. Sir, let us take her, one paramedic urged, wheeling over a stretcher. She needs immediate medical attention. The crowd that had stood silent for hours now pressed forward, offering water bottles and words of support, their earlier cowardice transformed into concern. We're so sorry, Mrs. Wilson. We should have done something. Thank God you came, Mr. Wilson. Thomas carefully laid Elaine on the stretcher, his hand never leaving hers. I'm riding with her, he stated, not a question, but a fact. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the evening air, police cruisers responding to the calls he'd made while racing to the scene. Captain Sarah Martinez, an old colleague from his previous department, was the first to arrive. She took in the scene with practiced efficiency. The crowd, the pole with its broken zip ties, Mitchell and Tanner still kneeling with their weapons on the ground. Thomas, she nodded grimly. State police are 10 minutes out. We'll handle these two. Make sure they're processed separately, Thomas replied, his voice steel wrapped in silk. No chance to coordinate their stories. Martinez nodded, understanding perfectly. As her officers moved to handcuff Mitchell and Tanner, the two disgraced cops finally found their voices again. "You can't do this," Mitchell shouted, struggling as the cuffs clicked into place. "We were maintaining order. This is how it's always been done here." "That's exactly the problem," Thomas replied, climbing into the ambulance beside Elaine's stretcher. The paramedics worked around him, attaching monitors and starting in 4. "Severe dehydration," one reported, checking her vital signs. "Possible heat stroke. First-degree burns on her arms." "Stay with me, baby," Thomas murmured, squeezing Elaine's hand gently as the ambulance began to move. Behind them, through the small window, he could see Martinez's officers leading Mitchell and Tanner to separate patrol cars, their protests drowned out by the crowd's demands for justice. The ride to Maple Grove General felt both instantaneous and eternal. Thomas watched as the paramedics worked, his anger simmering beneath his protective concern. Every time Elaine stirred or whimpered, his resolve hardened. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who'd suffered under Mitchell and Tanner's reign of terror. The emergency room staff was waiting when they arrived. They transferred Elaine to a hospital gurney with practiced efficiency, rushing her through double doors as Thomas tried to follow. "Sir," a nurse stopped him with a gentle but firm hand. "Let them work. You have some people here who need to speak with you." 2 state police investigators and a representative from the district attorney's office were waiting in the lobby. Thomas glanced at the doors where Elaine had disappeared, then nodded. "Let's make this quick," he said, leading them to a quiet corner. Over the next hour, Thomas gave his statement 3 times, each telling stoking the cold fury in his gut. He described finding the house empty, seeing the videos, arriving at the scene. He provided names of witnesses, mentioned Thompson's security cameras, detailed Mitchell and Tanner's history of abuse. This wasn't an isolated incident, he explained to DA Catherine Chun. This was the culmination of years of unchecked power and systemic racism. "And it ends now." Chun nodded, her pen flying across her notepad. "The town council's cooperation will be crucial. They've turned a blind eye for years. They won't have that option anymore." As if to prove his point, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Local station WMPG was already running the story. Breaking. New police chief confronts officers after racial incident. Multiple witnesses share videos. But it wasn't just the news spreading. Social media was exploding with years of pent-up stories. Thomas's phone filled with notifications as post after post appeared in local Facebook groups and Twitter threads. "That time Officer Mitchell made my son empty his backpack every day for a month." "Officer Tanner gave me a ticket for suspicious walking when I was just getting my mail. They followed my daughter home from school, said she looked like she was up to no good." The dam had broken. Every person who had suffered in silence, every incident that had been swept under the rug, it was all coming out now. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The nurse from earlier stood nearby. "Mr. Wilson, your wife is stable. They've moved her to a private room, and she's asking for you." Thomas was on his feet instantly, following her through the maze of hospital corridors. The sight of Elaine in the hospital bed, hooked up to IVs and monitors, made his breath catch. But she was awake, and her smile when she saw him was like sunrise after the longest night. "Hey, stranger," she whispered, her voice hoarse but strong. Thomas crossed the room in 3 strides, taking her hand carefully to avoid disturbing the foreline. "Hey yourself. You scared me, baby. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to mess up your big reveal." He laughed softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Pretty sure you did me a favor. Hard to ignore corruption when it's tied to a pole in broad daylight." "The others," Elaine said, suddenly serious. "All those people who've been afraid. What happens now?" Before Thomas could answer, there was another knock at the door. Jenny Parker stood there, tears in her eyes, clutching a handful of papers. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said quickly, "but people are gathering in the hospital lobby. They all want to make statements. They're saying, They're saying if Mrs. Wilson was brave enough to stand up to them, then maybe it's time they did too. Elaine squeezed Thomas's hand. Go. Help them. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Her voice was tired but firm. This is bigger than us now. This is what change looks like. Thomas hesitated, then nodded. He kissed her softly before following Jenny to the lobby, where he found not dozens, but hundreds of people waiting. Some held written statements detailing years of abuse. Others clutched phones with saved videos and photos. All of them had stories to tell. And in the background, on the lobby's TV screen, the evening news played footage from earlier. The ticker at the bottom read, New police chief promises change in Maple Grove. Era of corruption and fear is over. Looking at the determined faces around him, Thomas knew it wasn't just a promise. It was already happening. The same social media that had shown him Elaine's plight was now spreading a different message. Hope. Hope that speaking up mattered. Hope that justice wasn't just a word. The long night ahead would be just the beginning. But for the first time in years, the people of Maple Grove weren't afraid to be heard. The steady beep of hospital monitors marked time as Thomas Wilson watched his wife sleep. 3 days had passed since the incident, and while Elaine's physical condition was improving, the angry red burns on her arms served as stark reminders of what she'd endured. The doctors had said she was lucky. Another hour in that sun might have caused permanent damage. Lucky, Thomas muttered, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand where it wasn't marred by 4 lines. Some kind of luck, to live in a town where being tied to a pole in broad daylight could be considered a fortunate outcome. Elaine stirred, her eyes fluttering open. You're thinking too loud again, she murmured, managing a weak smile. How can you tell? Your forehead gets all scrunchy. She reached up to smooth the wrinkles between his brows. What's happening out there? I hear phones buzzing every time someone walks past my room. Thomas glanced at his own phone, which hadn't stopped vibrating since that first day. The investigation's gaining momentum. State police executed search warrants on the department this morning. They're going through everything: personnel files, complaint records, body cam footage. And it's worse than we thought. Mitchell and Tanner weren't acting alone. There's evidence of systematic discrimination going back years. False arrests, planted evidence, selective enforcement. All of it documented. All of it buried by the previous administration. Elaine's hand tightened around his. The other officers? 6 more suspended pending investigation. The state's sending interim officers to help maintain basic services while we rebuild the department from the ground up. Outside Elaine's hospital room, the corridor buzzed with activity. News crews had been camped out since the story broke, held at bay only by hospital security and Thomas's explicit orders. But they couldn't block out the sounds of the growing crowd gathering daily in the parking lot. Hundreds of residents holding signs, sharing stories, demanding change. I can hear them, Elaine said softly. The protesters. They're not angry anymore, are they? They sound hopeful. Thomas moved to the window, looking down at the crowd below. They're finding their voice. Yesterday, Mrs. Robinson, remember her son, the one with the backpack incident? She organized a speak out. 300 people showed up to share their stories. Good, Elaine nodded. It's time those stories were heard. A knock at the door interrupted them. D.A. Catherine Chin entered, followed by 2 state investigators. Mrs. Wilson, Chin smiled warmly. You're looking stronger today. Think you're up for some good news? Elaine sat up straighter, wincing slightly. Always. We're filing charges against Mitchell and Tanner tomorrow. Multiple counts: assault, official oppression, civil rights violations, abuse of power under color of law. The evidence is overwhelming. Between the videos, witness statements, and what we found in their work records, they'll plead out, one of the investigators added. They have to. Public sentiment alone would make a trial impossible. No, Thomas cut in firmly. No deals. They face a jury. The town needs to see justice done in the light of day. Chin nodded. I agree. Which is why we're also charging their immediate supervisors with criminal negligence and conspiracy. The whole chain of command that enabled this behavior. They're all going down, Elaine absorbed this news silently, her hands folded in her lap. Finally, she spoke. "I want to make a statement." "Baby, you don't have to," Thomas started. "Yes, I do." Her voice was stronger now. "People need to hear this from someone who lived it. Someone who stood there while their neighbors watched. Someone who understands both the pain and the possibility of healing." The next morning, against medical advice but with unwavering determination, Elaine Wilson faced the media from her hospital room. The local news had set up cameras, and national networks were carrying the feed live. "What happened to me was terrible," she began, her voice clear and steady. "But it wasn't unique. For years, members of this community have suffered similar abuses in silence. They were afraid to speak up because they thought no one would listen. They were afraid to stand up because they thought they stood alone." She paused, her hand finding Thomas's beside her. "But they were wrong. We were all wrong. Change doesn't come from being silent. Justice doesn't arrive in secret. It comes when we find the courage to stand together, to speak truth to power, to demand better from those who serve us." Her words resonated far beyond Maple Grove. By nightfall, #StandWithElaine was trending nationwide. News outlets picked up the story of the teacher tied to a pole and the police chief husband who exposed years of corruption to save her. But more importantly, they picked up the stories of countless others who had suffered similar fates without such dramatic resolutions. Thomas watched it all unfold while implementing his own changes within the department. The remaining officers were required to undergo extensive retraining. Body cameras became mandatory, with footage reviewed weekly by a civilian oversight committee. Community policing initiatives were launched, focusing on building trust rather than enforcing fear. "It's not enough to remove the bad apples," he explained to a room full of recruits, the first new officers hired under his leadership. "We have to change the entire culture. Your badge isn't a shield from accountability. It's a symbol of your commitment to serve everyone in this community equally." The changes rippled outward. Police chiefs from neighboring towns began calling, asking about his reforms. State legislators drafted bills incorporating his oversight measures. What happened in Maple Grove became a case study in how quickly systemic abuse could be confronted and dismantled when the right pressure was applied. A month after the incident, as summer began to fade into autumn, the town gathered for a candlelight vigil. The same square where Elaine had been tied to a pole was now filled with hundreds of flickering lights. The pole itself had been transformed, covered in flowers, notes, and messages of hope. Elaine, fully recovered but bearing faint scars on her arms that would never completely fade, stood before the crowd. Thomas stood beside her, his hand at the small of her back, offering silent support. "Look around," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Look at who stands beside you. A month ago, we were strangers divided by fear. Today, we are neighbors united by purpose. A month ago, this square was a place of shame. Today, it is a place of healing." She touched the pole gently, her fingers tracing the cold metal that had once burned her skin. "This pole meant to break us became the thing that made us stronger. The cruelty meant to silence us became the catalyst for change. And the fear that kept us apart," she smiled, looking out at the sea of faces illuminated by candlelight. "That fear has been replaced by something much more powerful. Hope." Thomas stepped forward then, adding his voice to hers. "The changes we've made are just the beginning. Real justice isn't a single victory. It's a continuous commitment to doing better, being better, demanding better. It's acknowledging past wrongs while working toward future rights." The crowd murmured in agreement, candles raising higher. Among them stood Jenny Parker and her husband, who had found their courage too late that day, but had since become vocal advocates for change. Mrs. Robinson and her son, no longer afraid to sit in the park. Mr. Thompson, whose security camera footage had helped build the case against Mitchell and Tanner. Hundreds of others, each with their own story of fear, transformed into determination. As the vigil concluded, people began placing their candles around the pole, creating a circle of light that pushed back the darkness. The metal that had once been a symbol of oppression now stood as a monument to resilience, a reminder that change was possible, that justice could prevail, that a community could heal if it faced its wounds honestly and worked together to bind them. Elaine leaned against Thomas as they watched the last candles being placed. "Do you think it will last?" she whispered. "The change, the unity, the hope?" Thomas kissed her temple gently. "Look at their faces," he replied. "Really look. That's not temporary emotion you're seeing. That's determination. That's resolve. That's a community that's learned its own strength." He was right. The faces illuminated by candlelight showed something beyond mere optimism. They showed people who had discovered their collective power, who had learned that standing together was stronger than kneeling apart, who had transformed their guilt over past silence into commitment to future action. The news cameras were still there, capturing it all. Tomorrow, more towns would see what happened in Maple Grove. More communities would realize change was possible. More voices would rise, demanding accountability, insisting on justice. But for now, in this square, on this night, something profound had shifted. The very air felt different, cleaner somehow, as if the truth being spoken had cleared away years of accumulated fear and silence. The candles would eventually burn out, but the light they represented, the light of justice, of unity, of unwavering resolve, that light would continue to shine, guiding Maple Grove toward a future it had only dared to whisper about before. A future where every citizen, regardless of color or creed, could walk the streets without fear. Where badges meant protection, not persecution. Where silence in the face of injustice was no longer an option. A future that began the day two corrupt officers tied the wrong woman to a pole, not knowing they were actually tying together a community that would never be divided again. 6 weeks after the incident, autumn painted Maple Grove in shades of gold and crimson. The morning air was crisp as Elaine Wilson stood before the entrance of Maple Grove Elementary, adjusting her scarf to cover the fading marks on her neck. She'd insisted on returning to work despite Thomas's concerns that it might be too soon. "Ready?" Thomas asked, standing beside her car. Elaine took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "They're just kids. My kids, who've missed you like crazy, according to their parents." She smiled, touching the fresh scar on her wrist, a reminder that would never fully fade. "Then I shouldn't keep them waiting." The hallways were unusually quiet as she walked toward her classroom. Then she opened the door, and joy erupted. "Mrs. Wilson, you're back. We missed you so much." Her students rushed forward, then stopped short, remembering the principal's warning about being gentle. But Elaine opened her arms wide. "It's okay," she laughed, and they swarmed her with hugs. Marcus, the boy who had tried to help her that day in the square, hung back until she beckoned him forward specifically. "Thank you for being brave," she whispered as he hugged her. The classroom had been decorated with welcome back cards and artwork. On her desk sat a vase of fresh flowers from her colleagues. But what touched her most was seeing Sarah and Marcus sitting together, their friendship stronger than ever. Proof that change was possible, even in the smallest ways. Across town, Thomas stood before a gathering of his officers, both the few who had remained after the purge and the new recruits who would help reshape the department. His badge gleamed in the morning light, streaming through the windows of the conference room. "Today, I renew my oath," he began, his voice carrying to every corner. "Not just to uphold the law, but to ensure that justice and protection are extended equally to every resident of this town. The badge we wear is not a shield from accountability. It's a symbol of our commitment to serve." He looked at each face in turn. "The changes we've implemented, body cameras, civilian oversight, community engagement programs, these aren't temporary measures. This is our new standard. And if anyone finds these standards too demanding, there's the door." No one moved. "Good. Because the real work begins now." That afternoon, the mayor held a press conference on the steps of City Hall. The same steps where he had once dismissed complaints about Mitchell and Tanner as unsubstantiated allegations. Now, with cameras rolling and the community watching, he faced his own moment of reckoning. To every resident of Maple Grove who suffered while we looked away, I offer my deepest apology, he began, his usual political polish replaced by genuine remorse. What happened to Mrs. Wilson was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of systemic failure. A failure of oversight, a failure of courage, and most importantly, a failure of basic human decency. He turned to where Thomas stood at attention. Chief Wilson's reforms have my full support. The era of turning a blind eye is over. Maple Grove will become an example of how a community can transform its darkest moment into its finest hour. The transformation was already visible in the town square. Where the infamous pole had stood, artists now worked on a sprawling mural. The design, chosen by community vote, showed a lane tied to the pole, but the ropes transformed into butterflies taking flight, carrying messages of hope, courage, and change. The mural's unveiling drew hundreds. Elaine stood before the crowd, her hand intertwined with Thomas's, as the canvas fell away to reveal the powerful image. When I look at this mural, she began, I don't see victimhood. I see victory. Not just my victory, but the victory of every person who found their voice, who stood up against injustice, who refused to let fear dictate their future. She touched the painted surface gently. This isn't just my story. It's the story of a community that woke up. A community that finally said, enough. Look closely at those butterflies. Each one carries the name of someone who suffered in silence. Their stories are now part of our shared history, and their courage is our guide forward. The following week brought the conclusion of Mitchell and Tanner's trial. The courthouse was packed as the judge prepared to deliver their sentences. The two former officers, their arrogance long gone, stood pale and silent in their prison jumpsuits. The evidence presented in this case reveals not just criminal acts, but a profound betrayal of public trust, the judge declared. Your actions represent the very worst abuse of power under color of law. The sentences came down like hammer blows. 15 years each for multiple counts of assault, civil rights violations, and abuse of power. Additional charges against their supervisors were still pending. But this was the moment many had waited for, justice, serve in the light of day. That evening, Elaine and Thomas sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded them of the mural. A gentle breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves and new beginnings. Penny for your thoughts? Thomas asked, noticing Elaine's contemplative expression. I was just thinking about that day, she said softly. Not the pain or the fear, but the moment you arrived. I was barely conscious, but I remember your voice. So calm, so certain. I wasn't calm inside. When I saw you tied to that pole. He shook his head, still unable to fully process the memory. But you didn't let the anger control you. You turned it into change. She leaned against him, fitting perfectly under his arm. Do you think we made a difference? Really made a difference? As if in answer, a group of teenagers rode past on bikes. Black and white kids together, laughing, unafraid of who might see them or what someone might think. They waved to the Wilsons as they passed. I'd say we did, Thomas smiled. The next morning, life in Maple Grove continued its new normal. Police officers walked their beats, stopping to chat with residents rather than intimidate them. The park where Mitchell and Tanner had once terrorized a teenage boy now hosted community events and youth programs. The town square, anchored by its symbolic mural, became a gathering place for celebrations rather than confrontations. At Maple Grove Elementary, Elaine's classroom remained a model of integration and acceptance. Her students, too young to fully understand the significance of what had happened, nonetheless absorbed its most important lesson, that courage and kindness were choices they could make every day. In the police department, Thomas's reforms took root and flourished. His officers learned that true authority came not from fear, but from respect freely given. The Civilian Oversight Committee, once viewed with suspicion, became an essential partner in building trust between law enforcement and the community. Other towns sent observers, hoping to replicate Maple Grove's transformation. News outlets continued to follow the story, documenting how one incident of cruelty had sparked a revolution of compassion. But perhaps the most powerful change was the quietest. The way people began to really see each other. The way they lingered in conversations that once would have been cut short by discomfort or prejudice. The way they shared stories, built bridges, created connections. 1 year after the incident, the town gathered again in the square. The mural had weathered its first winter, its colors still bright against the old brick wall. Elaine and Thomas stood before it, surrounded by their community, not as victims or saviors, but as neighbors among neighbors. A year ago, 2 men tied me to a pole, thinking they could break my spirit, Elaine addressed the crowd. They didn't know that you can't break what's already been forged in fire. They didn't know that every act of cruelty carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. And they certainly didn't know that their attempt to divide us would only make us stronger. She paused, looking out at the faces she now knew so well. Jenny Parker and her family, Mrs. Robinson and her son, Mr. Thompson, hundreds of others who had become part of their extended family. But the real change isn't in what they didn't know. It's in what we now know. We know that silence in the face of injustice is itself an injustice. We know that change doesn't come from waiting for someone else to stand up. We know that community isn't just a word. It's a commitment we make to each other every day. Thomas stepped forward then, adding his voice to hers. A year ago, I made an oath to protect and serve this town. Today, we all renew that oath together, not as police and citizens, but as neighbors and friends. The world is watching Maple Grove, not because of what happened to us, but because of how we responded, how we transformed tragedy into triumph, fear into hope, division into unity. The setting sun caught the mural's butterflies, making them seem to flutter with life. Each name written on their wings represented a story now told, a voice now heard, a wound now healing. The town had changed, yes, but more importantly, it had learned how to keep changing, how to grow, how to face its imperfections and work to correct them. The scars remained, on Elaine's wrists, in the community's memory, but they had become markers of resilience rather than reminders of pain. As darkness fell, someone started singing an old civil rights song. Others joined in, their voices rising in harmony, carrying a message that had gained new meaning in Maple Grove. We shall overcome. And they had overcome, not perfectly, not completely, but significantly. The town that had once been known for its racial tension and police brutality was now known for its transformation. The community that had once been divided by fear was now united by purpose. 2 corrupt officers had tied the wrong woman to a pole that day, not knowing they were actually tying together a community that would never be divided again. Their act of cruelty had backfired spectacularly, creating exactly what they had feared most: a united community where justice wasn't just an ideal, but a living, breathing reality. As Elaine and Thomas walked home that evening, hand in hand, they passed the police station where new recruits were finishing their community engagement training. They passed the park where children of all colors played together without fear. They passed neighbors who greeted them not as symbols or saviors, but as friends. We did good, didn't we? Elaine asked softly. Thomas squeezed her hand, remembering that terrible day when he'd found her tied to the pole, and all the remarkable days that had followed. We did good, he agreed. And we'll keep doing good, one day at a time. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, each one a point of light in the vast darkness. Like the candles at that first vigil, like the butterflies in the mural, like the hope in every heart that dared to believe in change. Maple Grove had found its way home. Thank you for joining us for this intense journey of courage and redemption. What would you do if you witnessed an act of injustice that seemed beyond your control? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that shed light on bravery and fighting against abuse of power.